Our lead this hour coming from an NBA legend, Phil Jackson. He's no longer coaching. He's no longer working in the NBA, but he recently became a trending topic in the Matrix, which is now pay to play over there at the Elon Musk's operation. So Phil Jackson trending over the weekend, the former Chicago Bulls and Lakers coach, on a hot-button issue. What did he say? All right, calm down. So Phil Jackson revealed that he no longer watches the NBA. He spent his entire professional life as a player and as a coach and just stopped working in the NBA a few years ago. Why? Well, one of the reasons Phil Jackson gave, he gave a couple, but one of the reasons he gave was because the NBA has become too political. Where have we heard that before? Now, during a recent, but not yesterday, podcast, during a recent appearance on a podcast hosted by Rick Rubin, if you're into music, you know who that is, the Zen Master, 77 years old, claimed that he has not followed the NBA since early in the pandemic back in 2020. It's when postseason games were played at a Mickey Mouse resort in Orlando. And the players were allowed to wear all kinds of woke slogans on the back of their jerseys on the court as well. And that was when the NBA jumped the shark for Phil Jackson. And just to prove that I'm not making this up, we went and we cut up the podcast. Here's Phil Jackson in a recent podcast with Rick Rubin saying that the slogans, well, they bothered.
Do you still watch a lot of basketball or
no? I don't.
Tell me about that. When and did you stop immediately from the time you stopped coaching?
No, I didn't. I watched some of the game evolve and decided, and they went into the lockout year and they did something that was kind of wanky. They did a bubble down in Orlando.
Yeah, it was wanky.
And all the teams that could qualify went down there and stayed down there.
No audience.
And they had things on their back like, Justice and, I made a little funny thing like, Justice just went to the basket and Equal Opportunity just knocked him down. And somebody had another name for a guy who has jersey in the back of a jersey had some other slogan.
Yeah, which I think all of us can agree how stupid that was, but especially looking back, how dumb it was. But anyway, here's more from Phil Jackson. As he had one other soundbite here. Again, this is Phil on a recent podcast with Rick Rubin. And he says that the people of the NBA did not realize that they were actually turning some people off.
Well, it was they even had slogans on the floor, on the baseline. It was catering. It was trying to cater to an audience or trying to bring a certain audience into play. And they didn't know it was turning other people off, People want to see sports as non-political. We've had a lot of different type of players that have gone on to be like, Bill Bradley was a senator, number of baseball players been representatives and senators and political, but their politics stay out of the game.
All right, so politics stay out of the game. Now, what do you think the reaction was to that? Do you think people said, you know what, he's getting up there, he's almost 80, the guy's seen a lot, he's done a lot. The guy lived a life. He protested back in the day. So we respect Phil Jackson. He's entitled to his opinion. Or do you think they now think Phil Jackson is an active member of the KKK? Which one do you think it is? Ding, 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 ding. All right, so let us discuss the question. What was your reaction to Phil Jackson's diatribe? Maybe this is the first you're hearing of it. Many people saw the story, but they didn't actually go back and listen to what Phil actually said. We did. I listened to it. I actually listened to about an hour. This podcast is like 3 hours long. I did not get through the whole podcast, but most of it's about like hippie stuff and Phil growing up and his parents being preachers and traveling around through Minnesota and Canada and Montana and all these different places. But to answer the question, how did you react to Phil Jackson's diatribe? I've got Pride of the Buckeyes, Piranha, and Past Glory. And we will lock all of these things together, and we are going to make the Baba Ganoush is what we're going to make. Now, number one. Number one. You know the NBA was out of bounds if Phil Jackson is saying the NBA was out of bounds? This guy was the hippie McHippie when he played in the NBA back in the day. All right, and his counterculture in his era of the NBA, protesting the Vietnam War, among other things, back in that time. And he wrote of gaining insight into basketball. Phil was the Aaron Rodgers of his day. He talked about how he learned more insight into basketball by taking LSD. He became known as the Zen Master, if you don't know the story by now, because he used Zen Buddhism and other alternative lifestyle techniques in coaching. Among the things he did with the Chicago Bulls and the Lakers was group meditation. They'd have group meditation sessions, hanging out certain items from the Lakota Warriors in the locker room for good luck, if you will, and splicing segments of random movies like The Wizard of Oz into game film to make a point. But Phil Jackson retired from coaching as the king of kings in terms of career playoff wins, playoff winning percentage. He won a total of 11 championships as coach with Chicago and the Lakers. And that's a guy who says the NBA got too political with their little slogans. And on this particular topic, Phil Jackson channeling the Ohio State University Pride of the Buckeyes marching band, the 225 all brass and percussion band, by dotting the I. He absolutely dot the I on this. You know who else agrees, by the way? This is going to really upset people. The NBA agrees that they got too political. Market research indicated that it was a bad business decision. How do we know that? They got rid of all of those slogans. The following year, they were all gone because they realized they were chasing away customers, and that is not what they wanted to do. And here we are 3 years later almost, and they're still trying to get back market share that they lost at the beginning of the pandemic when they went through all of those slogans. Now, secondly, we mentioned this. What is your viewpoint on the reaction to Phil Jackson's statement? I saw Jalen Rose, among others, attacking Phil Jackson, ripping him apart. And my viewpoint on that is there's one word: predictable. Right? And there's a lot of people who have careers in the media and different jobs in the media where they're race baiters. That's what they do. And Phil Jackson now, because he said this, is on the naughty list. He's now an enemy combatant. That if you do not agree in lockstep with everything, right? Everything, the reactionary piranhas smell blood in the water. It's very touchy. Phil Jackson gave an opinion, which the NBA, by the way, agrees with. The league office agrees with it. But he went out of bounds because he went against the dogma. And you're not allowed to do that. And if you do that, you get attacked. And so now he's got to be attacked. And despite a lifetime of work, which would indicate Phil Jackson knows a thing or two about life in the NBA and all that, and has been a person who's been a protester of certain issues in his life, all of that now is supposed to get flushed away. How dare you? How dare you point out the NBA royally screwed up? You're not supposed to speak the truth. You're not supposed to. So a separation of the NBA and political issues, God forbid. The most amusing part, my favorite part of this story, is the delayed outrage machine. You see, these comments made by Phil Jackson were not 2 days ago. They were not a week ago. They were at the beginning of the month of April. This podcast dropped on April 5th. It lay dormant for over 2 weeks, and then randomly it blew up like a Roman candle. And all of a sudden, the outrage machine was started. I can't believe this. Now, final point. Will we hear from Phil Jackson again on this subject? And I am shaking my head no, that we will not hear from Phil Jackson on this subject. And I'll tell you what, Phil is a hermit. And he's not someone who needs the platform anymore. You won't find him on the Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok. He's not part of the matrix, you can say, because he's too old. But there's no way. Last we saw him in public was at Pau Gasol's jersey retirement. He says he doesn't talk to old-time NBA players, his old players, on the phone because he's not a phone person. But the most important thing I can take from Phil Jackson, what I heard of him during this interview, was he's not an attention whore. He's not someone that hangs on to past glory. And there are so many people that are successful in sports, whether it be as a player or a coach, and they're the person that's on the team payroll for $100,000 a year. They come back to home games and want everyone to kiss their ass. And Phil could absolutely do that. Phil Jackson could get a job where the Chicago Bulls bring him back, and he can go and hang out with Bulls fans or go to the Laker games, and they'd bring him back, and they'd make him an ambassador, and he'd smile and do media appearances and all that. But he's not into that. He had his 15 minutes of fame. He's not about the past glory. At age 77, he's more than happy to enjoy what is likely the final chapter here, off the grid. And I've heard he splits his time. He's in Southern California quite a bit, but he also spends time in Montana. And he just lives a quiet life. And he doesn't need to recapture what he used to have with the Lakers or the Bulls. And you would think the reaction of people getting all flustered and the hullabaloo actually validates Phil Jackson's take. That all these people how dare you? How dare you point out this was not good for the business of the NBA? And I got to tell you, now I'm not a Laker guy. You know that. I'm a card-carrying Laker hater. But of all the people I've been around, Phil Jackson's in the top 5. And when I had a job where I had to interview people a lot, and I hated the job because the players didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do it. It was just a pain in the ass. But Phil Jackson was one of the people I loved to talk to when he coached the Lakers in that time, because Phil was unlike everyone else. All these other people I would talk to, it was cliches, catchphrases, cute little slogans. But Phil, you'd ask him a question, and he would actually contemplate the question, he'd process the question, and he'd answer the question. And even now, at age 77, Phil Jackson could give a tutorial on how to be legit. So I loved it. All right, it is the Ben Maller Show, and I know from doing this show and dealing with the public, which we do deal with, the great unwashed, there were a number of people in the year 2000 that reached out to me and said, I can't watch this. What are they doing? And the research proves that is actually the case, that they lost a large share of their customers by putting the slogans on the court and the jerseys, and that's why they quickly got rid of them the following year, unless maybe all of those issues were solved, there was justice and racism ended and all that. Either those things all went away because of the slogans, or the NBA realized, well, we're not going to fix the world here, so let's try to get our business back.